You have certainly been publishing for decades as a journalist, ultimately with Haaretz. You began with some other papers that we can talk about. But you've waited a while, you've accumulated your story, your national story, your personal story, and this book is, I think, been lodged in your head for a very long time. What's the benefit of waiting, and why did you wait?
This might go more deeper and more personal than you think, David. I mean, I think I'm a late bloomer altogether. I started my career in journalism, actually the real career, late. My life was renewed in many ways only 10 years ago. I have two small, young boys after having my 20-year-old, 21-year-old Tamara before. So I think that I take off slowly. I need long runways. My engines are heavy, and it takes a while for me to take off. So that's me. But talking about this book, this book was in me for 20 years, at the very least, perhaps more. I think it took, actually, you were really the midwife in a serious way, because it was only after I published the Sharon piece in the New Yorker in 2006, after he collapsed, that suddenly there was the opportunity to get this commercial, so to speak, opportunity to go back to my country when Random House gambled on me really to do the new Israel book, that allowed me to go back to my country and to look at it really from the inside and from the outside at the same time. So I think that the book that I wanted to write for 20 years, and I'll tell you in a minute why, suddenly there was a real opportunity to do it. Why did I think it was needed? Because I thought we lost our narrative. Israel lost its narrative, Israelis lost their narrative, the people who care about Israel lost the narrative, and I thought it is my role, and it was my ambition to try to rewrite that narrative.
What does that mean, to lose its narrative? It loses its founding myths under the pressure of reality, or something else?
It has to do with this. I mean, I think that in the first 50, 60 years of Zionism, we told the story so intensively that first of all we got fed up with it. And people were not willing to listen in. The pioneers, the heroism, all that. And it became banal, it became a cliche. In a sense, what this book tries to do is to bring Israel back from the cliche of Israel. And I think that when you take this step back and when you look at it, it's a phenomenal story. So I came to try at the same time to look at the problems, at the risks, at the flaws, the moral flaws, to look at it in the most brutally honest way possible, and yet to celebrate it. I think there's a lot to celebrate. And I think that what happened, mainly because of the '67 war and occupation that divided us, and the debate over occupation, which I'm part of, actually made us so bitter, so tribal, and then all this pettiness and viciousness that we are, as a people, were so good at that. All that created a kind of cognitive block, not only regarding the Palestinians, regarding ourselves. And I think we, especially young Israelis and young Jews in America, have lost the ability to look at Israel, at what a wonderful and problematic, but mainly wonderful drama it is.
I remember, I think it might have been the same first trip that I met you. There was a television series playing on Israeli television, highly influenced by the rise of the new historians, the new generation of historians, Benny Morris and so on, who were not only acknowledging terrible truths about the founding of the state, but publishing them widely. And there was a television series, I think, Takuma, or was that the name of it?
The first one was Amud Esh, and the second one was Tkuma.
And you were nice enough to translate some of these. And this was the first real time in the 90s where you started to see footage of Palestinians fleeing places like Lida, which we'll talk about in a second. It sounds like your project is influenced partly by that current of historical truth-telling, at least in part, in the 90s.
Absolutely. I think that part of the problem of Zionists and Israel lovers is that they tried to ignore the other narrative. And I think that in this day and age, you cannot. I mean, if you want young people who have a very good sense of authenticity or fake and cliches, they've heard about the other narrative, and the narrative is there. It's not foundless. So the attempt of Zionists and Israelis to ignore that, I think was a terrible, it was killing us in our actually vigility in many ways, because there was something that we would not address. And what I did, which was risky, call it courageous, call it stupid, call it whatever, was to try to touch the fire. I said, I'm so sure of my Israeliness. I'm basically so much part of this story that I think I have the inner security or strength to deal with the taboos, to deal with the things that my nation and many of my peers would be afraid to touch. And my being journalist, one of the first experiences I had as a journalist, perhaps the first interview I did actually in the late 80s, was with a great Palmach warrior, a woman, probably the greatest woman warrior on the Palmach, Netiva Ben Yehuda. And what she did, she published in the late 80s a series of books about the Palmach, the 48 Wars, which her peers in the Palmach at the time, the Rabin crowd, many of them were very annoyed with her at the beginning because she told like the real story, the sweat, the fear, the war crimes, the shell-shocked soldiers. For my generation, she saved them. Because what happened in the 50s, these warriors became like statues of like socialist realism statues. They were all blonde, beautiful, handsome, just, and you cannot relate to that. And what Netiva Ben Yehuda did to her generation was she brought them back to life. And then when you looked at actually the real picture, the real war they fought, how these 19-year-old kids created Israel and saved the Jewish people, you admire them, but after going through the sweat, blood, and tears. And in a sense, I think that this is what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to look at all the dark sides, all the wrinkles on our face, and then say, look how miraculous this is. How amazing, what the amazing human phenomena this is. And if you don't address the darker side and the problematic side, you don't have the authenticity and the inner strength to make the kind of statements that I'm very happy to make.
Well, let's get to the historical aspect in a second, that saga, and let's just stay for a bit on the Ari Shavit saga. Part of the spine of this book, and there are any number of, it's constructed in a rather extraordinary way. Both the family story is told simultaneous to the Israeli story is told, and it's quite an amazing construction. But there is the family. Your great-grandfather was a founding Zionist, a kind of Anglo-Zionist. But and that story is well told in this book, and we can't do everything here. So I want you to give us a sense of the household you grew up in, ideologically, the sense of Israeliness, the sense of what you knew, what you didn't know about the story you're going to tell.
So I'll say something about my great-grandfather and then about my immediate background. When I was watching him and learning him and trying to understand where he comes from, here comes a man, a Victorian Jew, who in many ways I think is very relevant to the crowd sitting here. Because in many ways...
You're not that old.
No. I'll tell you exactly why.
It's a joke.
I'll tell you exactly why. Because he was, over 100 years ago, he was a Jew, a self-made Jew who made it. And he faced, like, I think the challenges.
Made it how? What was it? What kind of business was he in?
Oh, he was the I think he made his money off copyrights for postcards or something, which were, postcards were a big thing in Victorian England. And he was very successful. He had a great life. Everything was wonderful. But he was faced with some of the dilemmas facing American Jewry today. How do you reconcile, in his case, his Britishness? He wanted to be 100% British and 100% Jew. And he saw the contradiction. Now, generalizing a bit, not only him, the genius in him and his fellow Zionists, the founding Zionists, there were two strokes of genius there. One was that they realized there was going to be catastrophe for East European Jews. They did not know.
Give us the date, Ari.
1897. I mean, he comes to Palestine in 1897, but he was a pre-Herzl Zionist. Then Herzl came along. He became an admirer of his. They were pretty close, and actually, and I'll say something about it in a moment. Herzl actually expected him to write a report about Palestine. His Palestine,
a man named Herbert Bentwich,
fit to colonization by the Jews. What was the genius? There were two elements. One was they did not know there will be Auschwitz and Treblinka, but they knew that East European Jewry is doomed. They probably expected some sort of mega pogrom. They knew that world was lost, and they knew the Jews must be physically saved because Europe is going crazy.
And he knew this as acutely in late 19th century London as one would know it in Vienna.
Exactly. I mean, that was the thinking. In this sense, Vienna and London were very close. They were corresponding on that. And the second thing, which is what I just mentioned, they did not know there will be a pure report, but they actually realized the challenge of the pure report. This is 110, 120 years ago. They saw that when anti-Semitism is gone, when you get out of the ghetto, Jews who do not have God and do not have a ghetto are in jeopardy, not physically, but they can evaporate in the world that loves them.
And what did they know of what existed in Palestine?
Oh, exactly. These are the two brilliant things were these two insights. That led them to blindness because they saw their deep understanding of the need to create a Jewish national home without which there will not be a Jewish future. That was genius. But when that led them, and led him specifically, to a kind of blindness because they would not see the other people that was there. Now, I give in the book, there are a lot of things in their defense because we all have to remember there was no state of Palestine. They did not conquer a state. The Palestinians did not define themselves as a people at that time. There were many, they thought of a huge Palestine, including all of Jordan, which is, in principle could have absorbed everybody. But having said that, I mean, after going all the defenses, it's amazing that they didn't see them. This is the opening of the book. And in a sense, this blindness in different ways went on throughout the years. It changed shape, but this difficulty to see the other...
As late as the 1960s, I don't remember the date, there was a famous bestseller by Joan Peters called Time Immemorial, which meant to fight the myth of a Palestinian presence in Palestine.
But I'll go even better because I think that in a sense,
huge bestseller.
By the way, there is right, definitely, so to speak, right-wing blindness, and there is also left-wing blindness. Because what leftist Israelis and liberals like to see, they have difficulty seeing the Palestinians as they are and Arabs as they are. What they usually see is just the crimes of Israel against Palestinians or the West against. There is an inherent difficulty. By the way, this is not only Jews and not only Israelis and not only Zionists. There is, and this is for another long talk we can have, the Edward Said legacy poisoned in my mind the ability of progressive people to see the people living in the Middle East as they are.
I don't understand what you mean by the Said legacy in this regard.
The right-wing blindness is failure to see there are people there that have rights. The left-wing blindness, especially academic and intelligentsia circles, is that there is such Western guilt feelings regarding the Orient that you cannot call Arab evil evil. You cannot call Palestinian fascism fascism. It's all shrouded in some sort of defense. The Palestinians are not really treated as moral agents. At the end of the day, there is this kind of...
When you say Palestinian fascism, you're referring to...
Hamas, for instance.
Right.
I mean, look at Hamas. You say, I mean, the very basic thing is to say, I mean, if you treat all people as equal, and all should be judged according to the same standards, how do you accept a movement that denies the rights of women, denies the rights of gays, persecutes Christians? Leave aside Israelis. I understand why Palestinians don't like me. Mm-hmm. And I understand why they're after me. I understand that. But why...
You being generically an Israeli.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
But how is it? I mean, the inability of our progressive media, progressive America, progressive Europe, to look at Palestinian evil and call it evil. There isn't that ability.
I don't buy this. I don't agree with you at all.
Of course. Okay. You should know.
Okay. But let me, we can't do everything here at length, but let me get back to you. I want to know, your great-grandfather is well explicated in this book and beautifully explicated. Your father and that household is instrumentally explicated. In other words, there's a wonderful chapter on the growth of the Israeli nuclear program. By the way, there is one.
You may say that.
Yes. According to foreign sources, you may
you are
say
the
it
foreign
as well.
sources.
The most ridiculous scam.
Not at all.
I
I beg to differ.
Ridiculous.
I beg to differ.
Okay.
I'll tell you why in a second.
Let's do one thing at a time. I'm in charge of this interview. For the moment. Then you. So what was the household like ideologically?
Well,
the Labor Zionist family.
Look, I come from a very unusual Israeli Ashkenazi background because my mother's family has this British background, and my father's family, I'm 8th generation from Safed, Tzfat. This is why I know Mahmoud Abbas will never give up Tzfat because we share the same city. So I'm, in a sense, I'm Anglo-Palestinian in my background. I don't have any Holocaust in my So the result of that, this is not that interesting. The result of that, I think, and this perhaps is relevant, that although the house I grew in was, I think my parents either voted Labor or for the small liberal party that was close to Labor. Yeah. But I was not in the right, I was definitely not in the religious right, or I mean, they were almost pariahs at the time. But we were like associated with Labor, but not in. I didn't, this kind of East European socialism was not, I mean, all my ancestors were kind of... Your family was
a bit grander than that.
All my ancestors were kind of liberals in a time when Israel was pretty Bolshevik. So perhaps the free spirit comes from there. Right. Now, talking about the nuclear program.
No, I mean, let's not. Let's just talk about your father's relationship.
No. So I'm saying my father was a junior scientist. He was not that important, but it's true, and I describe it in detail in the book.
It's a great chapter.
I grew up with the notion. I grew up in Rehovot, the Weizmann Institute, and I was a sensitive kid. So I realized there is this secret. I realized that beyond, and the Weizmann Institute is a beautiful place. It was a wonderful childhood. Everything was. It's almost Princeton in the Middle East, and I realized there is a hidden drama. And some of my father's close friends and associates were the most important.
They were actually 8, 9, 10 years old at this time.
I was. Yeah. I know. I won't get into the details. I know that I knew about what's really going on in Dimona when I was 6, because I knew it. Because my father was, my uncle was actually working there. And again, I'll say something that perhaps you will not agree with. I think that actually the nuclear project is very impressive. It's exactly the opposite of what happened with the settlement of occupation. Because on the one hand, it shows, it corresponds with the existential challenge, but in a very responsible way. And this is where I beg to differ about this funny, ridiculous policy, because this policy that does not allow me to say aloud here what you and I know that is true,
According
and
to
everybody
foreign
here,
sources, yes.
is actually, this is not extremist censorship. This is moderate, almost ingenious censorship.
It's magical realism.
No. Because what does that mean? It means, what's the depth of Dimono? It says we are in a unique situation in the world. Therefore, we need unique powers, but we should not abuse them. Therefore, we should live our daily life and deal even with wars in a responsible way, as if there is...
The United States feels the same way, doesn't it?
No. The United States, if you look at America's nuclear strategy when there was a Cold War, it was reckless. America was not only reckless in Cuba, and I admire John Kennedy with it, but America was the irresponsible, but and I don't want to bore the people here with it, but the NATO's...
They're not going anywhere.
NATO's strategy during the Cold War counted on using nuclear power pretty early. NATO had much less tanks and conventional warfare because they said if the Russians will invade Germany, we'll use tactical nuclear. Israel is far more responsible. Israel that is in danger, Israel that was attacked viciously, never considered seriously. It was always very sensitive. So the commitment there that we'll ignore this, we'll live our life, our dangerous life, as if this does not exist. This is really for the existential moment, when the third temple is really in danger. So in this sense, not only the scientists who made it, whom I knew personally, but the whole thing is actually a very impressive modern project dealing with a unique Israeli condition.
Difference is you didn't have a nuclear rival.
You want to get into that?
No. Another factor in your personal life, and this is also, maybe this article came out before, and yes, it probably did come out before I met you. In the New York Review of Books, I picked up the New York Review of Books, and there was this article by a youngish man named Ari Shavit about his experience in the army. I think it's at sort of tail end of the First Intifada.
Yeah, 91.
Tell us about that. And that must have been a huge part of shaping your political outlook and your outlook on what we have in our hands here.
Look, I had several experiences during my army services, even when I was an imperator, of being the odd guy out, seeing how things go wrong and Israeli wrongdoing, and wondering what I should do about it. So I won't tell you all of them unless you ask later. But I was, by that time, very active in the peace movement. But I was really in the Zionist left, in the Zionist peace movement, Peace Now, and I had ongoing arguments with the ones who encouraged refusing to serve. I was totally against it, and I'm still against it. And I think we were proven right about it. But the one time that I seriously considered refusing to serve was when I was called that spring, or late winter, early spring.
91.
91, March of 91. And I came for different reasons. I was not with my regular reserve unit. I was called to.
You were how old at the time, Ari?
I was 34.
34.
And my ex-wife was pregnant with my daughter at the time. And I was called, and suddenly I'm told that I'm to be a jailer in the Gaza
prison guard.
In the prison guard in the Gaza beach detention center. And I said, this is something I'm not doing. But then I had this commitment not to refuse. I was really like the few hours that you sit there in this shabby military base and you wonder, what are you doing? And the compromise I made with myself was, I'll go there, but I'll write about it. And so I went there with a notebook, so to speak, although I was not a very active journalist at that time. And these were probably my most difficult 12 days as an Israeli. Because, as I write in the piece, I hate and I reject all the comparisons with evil powers. But here you are, jailing other people, youngsters, 15, 16-year-olds. The ones that were there were not murderers or serious terrorists. They were thrown. They were thrown. Mm-hmm. And you see and you hear the screaming of the people screaming where the Shin Bet and other are interrogating people. And you wish you were dead. I mean, this is something you cannot deal with. And the beauty, the contrast, because the shore of Gaza is so beautiful, mm-hmm. and there's kind of the wind coming in, and it's I think I say it there. It's like as if you are in Greece of the 1950s. Everything is so beautiful, and the fishermen going out with their boats, and you turn your eyes and you see 1,000 people jailed, about 50 or 60 in that terrible ward where they do the interrogation. And it's as surreal as can be. And there is this blue and white flag hanging over this. So that was, it was so difficult being an Israeli there. It was so difficult. And I came home but there is a happy ending to that story, which shows you the other side of Israel. Because I came back, I wrote this piece that was almost treacherous. I moved as far to the radical left as I ever did. And then I get a call. I'm a nobody there. Nobody knows me.
Now this was published.
It was published in Haaretz.
It was published in Hebrew right away.
Haaretz. Okay. Later on, Bob Silvers heard mm-hmm. about it. I think Arthur Hertzberg came to Israel, told Shalomit Olani, told me he must read it, and got to 3 months later, which was mm-hmm. in New York Review of Books, just with my daughter Tamara was born. But I wrote. I thought it was my divorce from Israel. I wrote. It was so hard for me to write it, and then I get a call from the Minister of Justice, Dan Mirador, who doesn't know me. I'm not an important journalist. It's not like now. And now all the relationship with politicians is, they want something from us. We know mm-hmm. what it's like. He didn't know. I didn't have anything to give him. And he calls me. He invites me to his office, and he sits with me for 2.5 hours with a pad and writing all the details of what's going on. And it so happened that at the same day, both he and Dorit Beinish, who was then the general attorney, later the chief justice, came with Haaretz to the office and said, this cannot be. So on the one hand, you had this unbearable situation.
Isn't there any chance that it's outrageous? How did they not know?
And it's a good question. And by the way, they were in fight.
There's always the chance, and I feel it at times, that the government is performing for you its own moral outrage that they know damn well about.
You're too cynical, David. The Israelis are supposed to be cynical. No, it's not that. Not that good, really. This is why I mentioned the fact. Anything like that would happen now.
Did they act on it?
Of course. There was a commission and things, again, thank God, 2 years afterwards, this thing was dismantled and because of the Oslo Accord. Mm-hmm. And then, by the way, the Palestinian, the Arafat's security service took this to torture the people they didn't like. So I said there that there was going to be a Palestinian Club Med there one day, but that was not quite. But what's important here that it shows you these two sides of Israel. On the one hand, the brutality, the impossible situation that occupation leads us to, and on the other hand, the fact that there is a liberal Israel, there is a benign Israel, and because Israel is small and intimate and things can happen. You can deal with them. Good people can make great changes in Israel.
Ari, in the review that'll appear tomorrow by Dwight Gardner, he says arguably the central chapter in this book is a chapter about what's called in Israel the War of Independence, what's called in the Palestinian experience the Nakba, and it's centered on Lod, on Lida. And it was a chapter that was published, not coincidentally, in the New Yorker. And it got a lot of reaction just by being in the magazine. It got reaction on the left from both people in the West and people among Palestinians saying, okay, you've recognized the truth that we've recognized long ago, but then the conclusion you come to is maddening. The conclusion being that one has to recognize that without Lida there is no Israel. And obviously their conclusion, well, that's bully for you, but look at the circumstances I'm in. The reaction on the right was, how could you? How could you? Both here and in Israel, that it's a form of betrayal to tell this story in such harsh terms. Although the story, to be honest, is not a secret, and you don't reveal it as a secret. The chapter really is more about your confrontation with it as much as it is about the history.
And putting it in the context of the way Zionism entered that region, which is...
So I brought it up, now you tell it.
Well, first of all, tell me, what are the rules? I mean, after he wrote this, he cannot change the critique, right? So I can say whatever I think about it. So I beg to differ again with him, not with you. And I will not run away from Lida. But in my mind, if I have to choose what is the essence of the book, it's the chapter following Lida. That's 1950s chapter. That is, in my mind, if I have to choose one, which is difficult for me.
But we'll get to both.
Okay, but now I'll get to Lida. Look, I think this is, talking of touching the fire, this is the fire. This is the fire. Because at the end, my great-grandfather's blindness and the blindness of the founders of Zionism led to Lida. There was no other way. In this sense, my great-grandfather's partner, Israel Zangwill, was a very tough right-winger, saw it right. I would put it this way. The people who saw the problem were the ones on the extreme right, on the extreme left, the ones I don't identify with. But
Jabotinsky and
Jabotinsky and the ones further right, and Khadam and the people on the... My Herbert Bentley's son was in Brit Shalom, the first peace movement. So the people, the Martin Bubers, the Magnuses, both saw the Arabs clearly and understood the problem. The people in the center, the labor Zionists, had a deep need to ignore the problem. Why? Because, and this is something relevant in different ways to this moment, there is this contradiction, clash between our values and the brutal reality we find ourselves. So their way of dealing with it was to deny it. Well, the brutal people, on the one hand, were not troubled because they said, yes, we'll conquer the land and we'll do whatever it takes. Jabotinsky never said it, but it's implicit. But Zangwill said it, it's Jabotinsky. And the people on the left said, oh, what's the problem? We'll make peace with them, which was a bit naive. And then, so all of the first 50 years of Zionism, I based on the fact that the people who are moving it, whom I really admire, are actually living in a kind of denial because they do not want to address the problem. They see the problem first in 1936 when there is the clash, and that leads to 48. So you look at this and you say, I mean, all that we are talking now with the settlements and the occupation again, which I oppose totally, but that's, for the Palestinians, that's nothing compared to Lida. For the Palestinians, Lida is the problem. And yet I stand there and I say, I mean, I have to look at this. I have to acknowledge this. I have to recognize this. I don't believe in hiding things. And at the end of the day, I say these harsh sentences, which is that I will not condemn. I'm not willing. Some of these people that I've talked to were really complaining. I won't mention the name, but they complained about some Israeli bleeding heart authors that are very well known and so on. Mm-hmm. They said, we did the dirty work. They live on the land that we cleared for them, and then they say these guys committed war crimes. And that's a valid argument. Now, I think it's very important to remember, and I said it to you on some other occasions, I mean, this country is based on crimes that are much worse than Lida. Much worse than Lida. I mean, when I hear American liberals, Canadian liberals, Australian liberals, and New Zealand liberals, their liberalism and their universal values are based on the fact they basically murdered the other. And therefore, they can criticize us.
What's the difference?
100 years.
Exactly.
That's it. Our Zionism was late. And now, why is the difference? Because all these countries were really the product of white Europe.
So
we are the product of the victims of Europe.
So, Ari,
this is why we were late and
So when
poor.
somebody points out not only these realities of the 40s and before, but also precisely where the state of Israel is situated and what it's surrounded by, when somebody says to you, confronts you with those realities that you hardly deny, in fact, it's your work as a citizen, as a journalist, as a thinker, as a human being, to confront them all the time, how is Zionism then not a mistake, considering its predicament, considering the lack of bright light and optimism, and even at the end of this book, of the most passionate Zionist one can imagine? That's a
First
question
of all,
you have to
being
confront
honest,
all the time.
trying to be honest, we will know the answer about Zionism in 100 years' time or 200 years' time. We do not know the answer. But what we do know, and this is what I do want, and this is why I want to get to the 50th chapter, is that by the very fact that Israel there in such a vibrant and did I do something wrong?
No, it's somebody from Pittsburgh wanting to know something. So don't worry,
great.
we'll get there. There's just they're questions.
Okay. So when you look at it, you see, I told you what I think the Zionist genius was. But when you look at Israel today, that's a living proof daily that the need was there, the diagnosis was right. So the argument about the prognosis is still open because we don't know what the end would be. But the alternative, and I'm sorry to say that, the alternative for the Jewish people was death. There is no way, it's not only, Zionism's real sin is that it came too late to save European Jewry. That's our real sin. If we started 20, 30 years earlier, we would have been strong enough to absorb many of the 6 million that died. So that's the real sin. But when you look at the challenges today, if there would not be a Jewish national home, there will be no non-Orthodox Jewish civilization. And the irony here is, and the tragedy, the intellectual tragedy, that the ones who really, ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox Jews will survive without Israel. But non-Orthodox Jews have an existential need for Israel. And the tragedy of what happened...
For what reason? Civilizational reasons?
Yeah, absolutely, identity reasons. The reason, and this is the terrible thing, that we've let Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox powers take over much of Israel and alienate your boys. So your boys cannot feel, would see, and I didn't ask them to, but Israel, I'm sure that Israel is something of an embarrassment for them. And this, and the irony is...
My boys know, but
no,
I know what you mean. But yeah.
And the irony is that these progressive Jewish Americans need Israel like oxygen to survive. Mm-hmm. And we need you to survive. And yet this process of letting darker side of Zionism and of Jewish life take hold of Israel, occupation, ultra-Orthodox policies, alienate American Jewish young who need Israel, and alienate many young Israelis. And basically Zionism is so needed for progressive, liberal, non-Orthodox Jews. The other will be Jewish in 100 years' time without that. But I want to get to the...
Please do.
The reason I think that the 1957 chapter, the chapter about the 50s, is, if I have... The reason I like it so much, I think it's really the essence of the book, because there, Lida was the tragedy that we had to deal with. But when you look at these people of the 1950s, who really came from death and had all the reasons in the world to feel total victimhood, to get addicted to victimhood, they are really the ultimate victims of the 20th century. And yet, you don't see that there. Their revenge is to live. Their revenge is to have children. Their revenge is to move on. I hope I cannot see people, but there is probably here in the audience sitting Judith Richter, who is one of the people who grew up in the Bitzaron national housing estate. Her father was responsible for the Mengele twins. And when the war ended, he went around and to spread the Mengele twins and bring them back to their homes. And the fact that her father married her mother in Prague in 45, 46, and came to Israel and went with a kind of quiet heroism to work every day as an accountant in the Kameri Theater in Tel Aviv. And with the little money he saved, he bought a bit of furniture, a piano, to get her to study music. And the school in that neighborhood where all these children of these people whom many of them were human wrecks, actually did not sink into kind of defeatism or pessimism, but in a kind of, it's like a Fellini-like neighborhood. And they moved on with this kind of petite bourgeois heroism and they built their life and they built Israel. And in my mind, the heroism of the wars that is talked about is there. But there have been worse wars. And there have been people that were just as heroic as the Israeli soldiers. But the heroism of the 1950s, to be the ultimate victim of history and to move on and to have optimism and to have this energy and vitality of not surrendering, even when reality is so cruel to you, that's the secret of Israel. And if there is a wish that I have, is that we'll connect again to that spirit.
Does it feel disconnected now?
Look, I think that you see it in Startup Nation. You see it with the economy. You see it in a lot of it in the arts, in the culture. All this vibrancy. You don't see it in our political life, and that has to do with the lost narrative. So, I think a lot of Israelis are amazing individuals, impossible individuals, but amazing individuals. But the energy is amazing. Really, our life between wars is a great life. The relationship we have, the warmth, the creativity, it's a great life there. But this kind of sense, the people then, what Zionism had then, even before that, was, people were poor, there were dangers all around, but they felt they had a lot of future. They were the blue skies of future, and this we lost. And this, I hope, we'll find a way to...
The shadow over that dynamism is the dilemma that you paint politically in the present tense, and it's related to the questions that you've kindly sent up, both from this audience and from our viewers elsewhere, has to do with this bifurcated sense of situation. Israel is the only nation of its kind that's an occupying power, and at the same time, it feels itself under threat, enormous threat, whether it's from...
David doesn't feel itself under threat. It is threatened.
It is threat. We agree on that 100%. Whether it's from its geography, its proximity to the Syrian situation, Iran, et cetera, Hezbollah, and you know that. How is it possible? How is that possible to become solved? The occupation has existed since 1967. The vast majority of the life of the state of Israel. The sense of threat, the actual threat, the geopolitical, geostrategic threat, has existed from the very first hours of the beginning of that state. How does this possibly move forward in your view? Right now, Secretary Kerry is shuttling from Washington to Ramallah to Jerusalem in the search yet again of a revival of a two-state solution. It seems highly unlikely that that will happen anytime soon. In the meantime, discussion of a one-state solution raises its head all the time, more and more in different quarters. Separation of the Palestinian polity is another problem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to mount up these obvious things that you know all too well. What's the way out?
The way out is to find the right synthesis, to find the middle ground, but in a real way. Now, Tom Friedman defined himself years ago as a radical centrist. I think I am a radical centrist. And what does that mean? It just has to do with the very important question you asked. The problem, the intellectual fallacy in my mind of many, and for a long time, is that the left looks, the two pillars of the Israeli condition, unfortunately, are occupation and intimidation. The left concentrates all the time on occupation and ignores intimidation. The right concentrates all the time on intimidation and ignores occupation. And the only way to deal with it, first of all, intellectually, in an honest way, is to see the two things. Think that we must deal with occupation, but as an intimidated nation. Now, in my mind, the failure of the left in Israel and the international community to recognize, to internalize intimidation. So there's always talk security needs, but security needs is technical general stuff. We have to internalize that intimidation is there. And because we failed, we leftists, so to speak, and peaceniks, because we failed to recognize, we could not end occupation.
Who fails to recognize that's there? Do you think the bubble around Tel Aviv or certain communities in Israel is
definitely? But even all the previous, all these attempts of what I call old peace did not deal with it, and this is why they played into the hands of the right, because. When Shimon Peres promised, New Middle East in the 90s, and even when Sharon pulled out of Gaza, which I supported, but his mistake was that he should have said it's a blood, sweat, and tears operation. There's no, we should do it, even rockets will come in and we'll deal with the rockets. That's what he should have done. When it was presented as something that will lead to some quiet, and then the rockets come in, then the whole theory falls apart. I still believe there is a reasonable Israeli majority that will go for a national project of saving the national Jewish home by ending occupation gradually, cautiously, in a sensible manner. If what you offer the people is a make-believe peace, they reject it.
Fair enough, but what is a step that is both satisfies that, but is serious enough to be taken seriously among the Palestinians and elsewhere?
I think we discussed it a bit yesterday with Charlie Rose, but I'll say, assuming everybody watches Charlie Rose, I'll say it the first thing I would do I would go back to what Obama tried, but in the wrong way in 2009, which is settlement freeze. We cannot let the two-state solution bleed to death by the building. If Naftali Bennett was here a few days, Naftali Bennett, whom I appreciate personally, I know him, there are some virtues to him, you wrote about him. Unintentionally, he's the most dangerous post-Zionist. He's killing Zionism. No, he means well. But he's killing Zionism. He's much more dangerous to Zionism than the extreme left. And we must stop this. We must stop this bleeding to death of the two-state solution. And that, in my mind, can be done. And if that will be done, I think from that moment, a new dynamics will start because the Palestinians will feel a change. Then what I would go for is a gradual steps where we gradually evacuate parts of the West Bank while the Palestinians, the best news that came out of this conflict and the only success of America in the Middle East in the last decade was Fayyad. Fayyad is not there. I hope he will be back, but we should work with Fayyadism. Fayyadism is so important because for the first time in Palestinian history, there is a Palestinian leadership that really cares about the Palestinian young. You know, the old Sting song said, "I hope the Russians love their children too." And the main problem with the Palestinian political culture, mainly under Arafat, definitely under Hamas, was they did not care enough about their own children. Again, I understand why they have a conflict with me. But the fact that they did not care enough, like the people in Bitzaon, with building themselves, educating their young, that was the problem. Fayyad and Fayyadism are a change, are a dramatic change.
I don't need to tell you that his popular support is shaky.
But this is where I get so angry. I can really get angry here, because here you had a golden opportunity. I mean, you had the best Palestinian partner in a way there. You needed to build a tailor-made political process for Fayyad, which means not Jerusalem and not the right of return and not all these issues that no Palestinian right now can deal with, but build up a slow, gradual nation building of Palestine with a slow, gradual Israeli project of ending occupation. That's what should have been done 5 years ago. I still hope it's not too late.
Or 40 years ago or more. But
definitely, but
Fayyad appeared. The grinding effect of time is that it makes gradualism much more difficult.
What I fear so much is that if once again we'll go for a fourth attempt to reach the moon,
and it fails,
we'll end up in the abyss. We'll end up in the abyss, and this might happen very quickly.
Ari, I'm duty-bound to ask questions from all around the nation. This is from Pittsburgh. Do you think U.S. Jews should be actively engaged in discussions and criticisms of Israeli government policy?
Very much so. I think, you want a 5-word answer, or can I answer?
9 words.
I can't do them. I can't do them.
50. Go ahead.
It has to do with what I said to you. I think we have to remember that both Jewish Israel, the Jews in Israel, and the Jews in the United States are now challenged. And we must know that we can only save ourselves as a people by working together. Therefore, I want American Jews to be involved in Israel, whether right, left, or center. I want them to care, I want them to be part of our life, and I want, what is even more needed, for Israeli Jews to wake up at last and to begin caring about what's happening in this country. I want Israeli governments and Israeli public to care about the cost of Jewish education in this country. I think we should deal with this issue. You should be dealing with our issues, and we have to deal with your issues.
Explain what you mean by Jewish education. You're a secular guy. I've been to your home for, well, a lot of times, but for Shabbat dinner, but it's essentially a kind of secular Shabbat. There's quick prayers over the challah and candles, and off we go, and we're eating Chinese food or whatever it is that we're having that night. I'm not kidding.
And a beautiful hostess.
And the best, absolutely the best. Or tied for first. That my wife is not here. So what do you mean by Jewish education? In this city, I should tell you, that generally means, it's a range of things, but it is first and foremost religious-based.
So, but this is the point. This is the point. If you want non-religious Jewish education in the city, you need Israelis. You need Israelis. There isn't enough energy in this country to create this. We have to work on this. Now it's our challenge.
What do you mean we need Israelis?
You
mean,
look,
other than read this book?
I repeat what I said. I said progressive, non-Orthodox Jews, there aren't that many of us. And we have, if we want to save our civilization, our values, we have to work together on this. And I think it's outrageous that the Israeli government, Israeli politics is ignoring this issue. And I think that, I'll repeat, I think that it's our commitment to think of American Jewish kids every day. Every day. I mean, we American Jewish kids will not stay, again, non-Orthodox ones, will not stay Jewish if there isn't an Israel that is attractive to them. And we will eventually not be able to survive if we don't have future support of young American Jewish kids.
All right, from Sedona, Arizona, where it sounds awfully nice right now. What do you think of Iran? Do you think this deal that could possibly be announced as early, or an interim deal that could be possibly announced this week, is the real, as we say, Megillah on Purim?
I think the deal is problematic.
Why?
And no, but I'll say I don't want. That's boring, you know. People. The
Not
problem
boring
with
at all.
no, the problem basically because you let look. If you want the deal with Iran, is a deal with dangerous people, very sophisticated, dangerous people. You don't give them legitimacy, and you don't let them off the hook economically wise before you're sure that you saw total conversion there. You don't do that. And I'm afraid that the legitimacy already given to Rouhani before he delivered, and the attempt to loosen up the sanctions, before, even some of them, before there is a real dramatic change in Iran, is very dangerous. And I'll give it to you my constructive idea. I do not understand why the deal on the table is not total freeze. If there is real change, the people who really believe that there is a change in Iran, then Iran, I'm not asking them to dismantle everything. I'm not like Netanyahu with these very ambitious, justified demands, but too ambitious. But I'm trying to be reasonable. Why not freeze? President Obama wanted us to freeze the settlements in 2009 because you do not want facts on the ground while the political process is going on. I don't think there's any analogy between the two, but the logic is the right one. If there is going to be a serious negotiations, the great suspicion is that the Iranians are deceiving us. They deceived us so many times, and I'm talking deceiving the West, so many times. So if they are serious, demand total freeze, not one centrifuge working during the period of negotiations with very aggressive monitoring. Then you can have the negotiations 6 months, a year, no rush. You can really actually deal with it. But right now, if you're loosening up the sanctions, you might have a slippery slope that actually gets them off the hook before they deliver.
Let's assume you can't get that. You're going to walk away? Because you're not.
Let me say in a sentence, my one advice to President Obama, if I may.
He's watching in Sedona, Arizona.
Be a Kennedy, don't be a Carter. If you'll be a Carter, we are in deep trouble.
Kennedy invaded the Bay of Pigs. Kennedy was not all Cuban Missile Crisis.
You know what I mean.
Up to a point. We have, I think, limited time. I don't want to test your patience, but I think we haven't had questions from the audience. And I know about the cards, but you know what? Let's just the hell with the formalities. Raise your hand, and please, it must be a question, not I have 3 points.
There are actually people there.
Yes, there are. Does anybody have a question? Yes, sir, in the front. But a question.
There was a profile of an Israeli general the other day in the Times who's apparently may become a Rav one day. And it says that he used to wear kippah all the time and he's Shomer Shabbat. So what does that mean? If that seems to be a growing trend in Israel where you have a very high percentage of the officer corps is, religious Zionists. The people used to be coming out of Shomer Tzayir and places like that are now coming out of religious Zionism. What is the implication of that?
Naftali Bennett is an example.
Repeat the question.
Ari, repeat the question. You should work harder.
The changing face of the Israeli army, with more religious officers. Look, I was concerned about that trend like for 20, 30 years. Actually, I wrote a piece about that, I think, like 25 years ago. Actually, to this day, it did not become that dramatic in the higher levels. I mean, still the top of the generals, the Israeli generals are generally very reasonable, not extremist, and most of the time more dovish than the politicians. So that's not a major problem right now. I'll tell you what the problem is. If we will try to evacuate settlements, you will find that 30-40% of the soldiers who have to do the job are religious, and some of them rather extremists. And then the strain on the army, on its ability to do that, will be much more difficult than it was during the Gaza pullout. We somehow survived the Gaza pullout, but it was a combination of luck, it was a combination of Sharon's unique nationalistic authority, which meant that it was difficult for the extremists to rebel against him because he was such an iconic nationalist figure, and we don't have anyone like that. So you're wrong and you're right. I mean, the problem is not that the army is right now becoming so religious, but when it comes to deal with the settlements, we will need to think of very innovative solutions because it will be very difficult to repeat what was done in 2005.
Over there.
First of all, I read the book. Thank you. It's an excellent. And
You read the book already? It's been published one day.
I know. It's a wonderful book. Thank you. Thank you for that. Very, very thought-provoking. Some places difficult to read. One of your central sort of theses is, and I quote, is that the occupation is wrong, futile, and malevolent. And I guess I would ask you to speak to yes.
What was the last one?
Malevolent. The occupation
Malevolent.
is wrong, futile, and malevolent. Under the circumstances of how it happened and how it evolved and what's been, I mean, what could have and should have been done instead?
Instead of occupation?
Instead of where we are today, given how the occupation came about in the West Bank and how people are trying to get out of it, what should have been done instead?
Well, I have my settlement chapter, fraught chapter, 1975 of fraught chapter, and that part of it, in my mind, is easy. I mean, I don't know how the hell we are going to deal with it, but what went wrong is very, very easy to define. Because what we should have done is, of course, offer the most generous peace deal from 67 on and see whether there are partners. I don't think that there were partners. Perhaps King Hussein was a partner for a deal in the 70s, in the early 80s, and we were not generous enough. We discovered our dovishness a bit too late, and by that time, Hussein was gone as a possible partner. I'm not sure that with the Palestinians we could have struck a deal earlier, before Oslo. But the settlement part, because the alternative Israeli policy should have been, okay, we need to control much of this area for security reasons, so we are holding it really until the partner comes along and we can give the land to a partner that will live in peace with us. But building settlements there, in my mind, and in this sense, while I'm centrist on many issues and I anger my friends on the left most of the time, on the settlements, I'm as dovish as a dove can be. This was such a mistake. And building of Ofra and everything that came following it was...
Is it an irreversible
it's a
mistake?
mind-boggling. Really, this is really for Barbara Tuchman's March of Folly. This is incomprehensible. Incomprehensible.
Ari, is it an irreversible mistake?
It's getting more and more difficult as we speak. I still hope there are kind of solution, but this is because if there are no partners, if we are in a state of war, okay, let's have a line where we have full legitimacy and let's not create what is perceived as a semi-colonial situation. I mean, the settlement part of it is a total mistake. In my mind, there is no justification whatsoever, and this mutation of Zionism creates, and God forbid, but if it goes on, it will bury Zionism.
Sir, we have time for one more, so let me get from over here, and then that's it. And I apologize for the limited time, but the Friedman Bar Mitzvah is in this hall coming up, and the band is already setting up. So, ma'am. That's a short one. What is your prognosis for Israel for the next 30 to 50 years? The Friedman Bar Mitzvah will have to wait. Ari?
Look, what
Make yourself comfortable.
as you can notice, I'm not religious, and there isn't a mystic bone in me. But I must say that when I did this journey, went through this journey, there is something really nearly miraculous in the way, and almost unexplainable in the way the saga evolved. And basically what you see is that every decade, the walls were closing in on us for this reason or another. And every decade something happened, externally or internally, that enabled us to move forward. So I won't bore you with all the details, but believe me, every decade this was the situation. So when you look at the objective challenges, the overload on Israel is scary. But what you do have in Israel, and this is in my mind the greatest success of Zionism, is this robust, energetic, vital society. And if I have to sum up the book in one sentence, it's vitality against all odds. So I believe that this vitality, at the end of the day, will overcome the challenges and this overload of threats that is surrounding the country I so much love.
Ari, thank you. And I should say one thing. Ari will be signing books outside. Don't hesitate. My Promised Land by Ari Shavit. Thank you very much, Ari. Well done.